Hello, sorry to keep you all waiting. Before I begin, it is day 42 of the botched New York City primary, where still there is no election results in one congressional race. This, as the New York Times notes, is due to, quote, the deluge of 400,000 mail-in ballots, previewing the, quote, challenges facing the nation as it looks towards conducting the November general election with mass mail-in voting. Now I'd like to highlight the Trump administration's actions on telehealth, which the president detailed yesterday. The president signed an executive order to make regulatory reforms allowing for greater access to telehealth and toward making it permanent. The Trump administration has cut red tape allowing telehealth services for seniors and for other Americans. 35% of Medicare beneficiaries took advantage of the president's reform, seeking telehealth services over the phone rather than through video conference. A simpler and a smarter way to go about things is now available to Medicare beneficiaries. The president also took executive action to boost rural healthcare services. According to a 2019 study by Navigant, rural hospitals would be devastated by Medicare for All, otherwise known as government takeover of healthcare. And under that analysis, they found that if Democrats had their way, 55% of rural hospitals, or 1,037 hospitals across 46 states, would be at high risk of closure. The president's executive order calls for strategic investments in our rural communications infrastructure, which will expand telemedicine and rural broadband access. Democrats seek to deny Americans their health care freedom, but President Trump is working hard to save your health care by guaranteeing protections for people with pre-existing conditions, eliminating the highly unpopular individual mandate of Obamacare, stopping surprise medical billing, increasing transparency, and lowering drug prices. President Trump will continue to work hard to enact these healthcare principles by requiring price transparency, allowing states to purchase drugs from other countries, and improving Medicare to lower drug prices and reduce out-of-pocket cost for seniors, and by ending surprise medical billing and making companies compete for your business by providing more options and more affordable plans. Lastly, later today, Senior Advisor to the President, Ivanka Trump, will be joined by Attorney General Barr, Director of the Domestic Policy Council, Brooke Rollins, executives from organizations that combat human trafficking, and survivors from across the country for a roundtable to highlight newly awarded Department of Justice grants to provide safe, stable housing to survivors of human trafficking. DOJ will award over $35 million in housing assistance grants for victims of human trafficking to provide supportive housing and appropriate services to survivors of human trafficking. And with that, I'll take questions.
Yes. Thank you, Kaylee. Two questions about the coronavirus. The president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, he said 2 days ago that he believed that the only way to have a real strong, robust economic recovery would be to shut the country down again for a month to 6 weeks. I know that this idea of short-term pain for long-term gain has been shot down before by President Trump, but has it been given any more consideration given the recent flare-ups across the country?
No, and I would refer you to what Dr. Fauci said back in May. He said we can't stay locked down for such a considerable period of time that you might do irreparable damage and have unintended consequences, including consequences for health. And several of those consequences I've outlined for you before. For instance, the fact that in any given year you have 120,000 Americans who die from drug overdose or suicide, and we saw during the lockdown previously that we saw overdoses nationally jump by 18% in March and 29% in April, 42% in May. Overdoses do go up, suicides do go up, cancer cases are missed, as Dr. Scott Atlas has pointed out, that in the U.S. alone there are 150,000 new cancer cases that arise every month among patients. Most have not been seen, and that was referring to the lockdown. The American Cancer Society also noted that during the pandemic they've seen an 80% drop in cancer cases being identified. So there are many health consequences. Those are three of what are a long list.
But so no matter how bad it gets, you don't think there's any way that President Trump would look at a nationwide
I'm certainly
lockdown?
not going to engage in hypotheticals, but no, the president is not considering a national lockdown. What he is encouraging is mitigation efforts like wearing a mask, which is patriotic, like social distancing, and engaging in these really common sense, safe measures to safely reopen and avoid the health consequences of a lockdown.
Okay, and one more thing about the negotiations going on today on Capitol Hill. Given the amount of money that is involved, the amount of Americans that would be impacted by this next stimulus bill, why isn't President Trump more personally involved, or at least more visible in these negotiations?
Well, he is through his chief of staff and through his secretary of the Treasury. He's regularly updated. I was just in the Oval Office with him, and the chief of staff was updating him on that very measure. But right now, the Democrats are being fundamentally unserious. They've offered no concessions. They've offered no plans. If anything, they're moving the opposite way. And to demonstrate their unseriousness, their $3 trillion plan, they've now said, oh, it needs to be $3.4 trillion, when the president has had a very narrow, specific focus right now. It's extending unemployment insurance. It's making sure Americans don't get evicted. And when Democrats, as I noted on Friday, were offered the Martha McSally bill, which would have been extending unemployment insurance for at least 7 days while these negotiations continue, that was rejected by Chuck Schumer, which should tell you exactly where Democrats stand. And it's against hardworking Americans who lost their jobs through no fault of their own.
The president about 10 minutes ago tweeted about vote-by-mail absentee voting. He says, in Florida, the election system is safe and secure, tried and true. What, in his view, changed? Was he advised by Republicans that he was potentially suppressing his own vote by stoking unfounded fears about mail-in voting? And will he admit now what is the fact that voting across the country by mail is safe and secure and tried and true?
Well, the president has always said that absentee voting for a reason is different than mass mail-out voting like what Nevada is seeking to do, which leads to mass
It's the
fraud.
same thing.
And also, I'd refer you to the campaign on this, but there was a victory in Florida with regard to ballots. So I believe that's what he was referencing. Would refer you to the campaign for details on that. But he's been unmistakably clear that when you have this mass mail-out voting, like what Nevada wants to do, the consequences are real. When the Las Vegas Journal-Review was reporting, did extensive and very good reporting on Nevada's first all-male primary election, they note that there were photos of ballots tossed in trash cans, littering apartment mailbox areas, dozens pinned on the complex's bulletin boards in various apartment complexes, and you have a postal worker who said that when she went to go deliver some of these ballots, in several cases people had moved or died. She kept 65 ballots on her first delivery, 100 on her second. It is with fraud and with delay, and that is what the president stands firmly against. He wants a free and fair election.
Extensive research shows that there is fraud in vote-by-mail systems is extraordinarily rare. The president votes by mail, you vote by mail, and a dozen other top Trump administration officials vote by mail.
So with regard to the absentee system, that's right, and there is ample evidence of fraud. I would point to you the best example of this, and very recent, was May 12th, New Jersey's special election in Paterson, New Jersey, where 1 in 5 mail-in ballots were found to be fraudulent in the election. New Jersey officials were charged in that case, and resident Ramona Javier said this is corruption, this is fraud. There are 8 relatives and immediate neighbors she knows of listed as having voted, but who insist they never even received a ballot. There are ample examples of fraud, and we can get those to you more than just Paterson, New Jersey.
Another question on a different issue. What can the administration tell us about the deadly explosion in Beirut? What led to it?
So that was breaking as I came out. We're tracking it closely, and just rest assured that we're taking a very good look at that. Yes.
Kelly, thank you. The environmental bill the president signed this morning, it was passed overwhelmingly by both houses of Congress. Both Republicans and Democrats signed on to that legislation. Can you explain why there were no Democrats at the ceremony or even mentioned in the president's remarks?
The president is very proud of what happened today, the single largest investment in America's national parks and public lands in history, the most significant conservation achievement since Teddy Roosevelt won the support of more than 850 conservation groups, and it provides $900 million a year in permanent funding to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And you're asking about recognition of congressional Democrats right now, and the only thing that we're recognizing about congressional Democrats right now is how appalling it is that there are Americans who are going without paychecks because they refuse to partner with Martha McSally, Republicans, and the president in ensuring that those payments go out.
Okay, Taylor, the president has said, as recently in this Axios interview, that he believes that many people believe that there's disadvantages to testing. Can you walk us through what those disadvantages are, and if, as he stated back in June, he still believes that testing is overrated and makes the U.S. look bad?
So I would know what the president refers to with regard to testing is that, the media doesn't often acknowledge that when you do the most testing in the world, lead the world in testing, that you do identify more cases. So that is what he refers to with testing, and he's made that point a few times. But look, we lead the world in testing, and the president's very proud of this. The administration's very proud of this. We've done more than 60 million tests on track, according to HHS, to do 100 million by September. That's extraordinary. And when you compare that to the next highest number, India, in the ballpark of about 16 million tests, what we've done in this country is impressive, and the president's very proud of that effort.
Do you still believe that testing in the U.S. is overrated?
The president, again, points out that the media refuses to acknowledge that when you test so much, you do identify more cases. That's the point he was making, and he's very proud that actually since March 12th, we have increased daily testing by 32,000%. Worth mentioning, this is a novel virus. There wasn't a test, and this president led the way in getting emergency use authorizations to, one, identify working tests, and then to surge the testing capacity by 32,000% since March 12th, and that's thanks to President Trump.
Thanks, Kaylee. On TikTok, the president has argued that the United States should receive money in return for a potential sale, but he hasn't really explained how. Under what authority could the Treasury collect fees from China, from Microsoft, or from any other U.S. buyer to get this done as the president demanded?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get ahead of the president on any official action, but he has made that point, and he and both Secretary Pompeo have said that the U.S. will take action in the coming days on Chinese apps, including TikTok, due to the national security risk. And we all agree that there needs to be a change, especially with TikTok collecting significant amounts of private data on users. It's unacceptable, but I won't get ahead of the president on what those actions look like.
Yes, thanks very much. I wanted to ask also on TikTok about Beijing has said that it may hit U.S. firms as a response. It sort of slammed this smash and grab of TikTok. What do you say to that in regard to China? And secondly, China has not complied with its commitments under the U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal. We're reporting today that they've only completed 5%, for instance, of the energy purchases in this first half of the year. Can you just sort of say?
Yeah, we encourage China to fulfill their obligations in the Phase 1 China deal and to fulfill their end of the agreement. But the president remains keenly focused on TikTok and protecting the private data of millions of people in this country. And PRC's, the People's Republic of China's laws require Chinese companies to cooperate with PRC security and intelligence services, enabling the CCP to access foreign user data. And what this means is that these entities ultimately answer to the CCP, which actively undermines U.S. interests and is hostile to American values and the rights of individuals. And the president will stand firmly against China on this.
Can I just, yes, John?
Thank you, Kaylee. I wanted to ask you about the COVID relief bill. The president has suggested if there is no agreement that is reached, the president would act unilaterally. As you know, the power of the purse resides with Congress. So what would the president do unilaterally? Explain what he could do unilaterally as it relates to providing relief to American families and American businesses.
Yeah, again, I won't get ahead of the president on determining what that action would look like or would be. I will leave that to him to determine. But what I would say is this, is, right now we have Secretary Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows once again asking Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to come to the table. The ball is in their court here. We've made at least 4 offers. They've made 0 offers. It's unacceptable for hardworking Americans.
Kaylee, on mail-in voting, which you talked about at the very top of the briefing, the president suggested yesterday that he has the right to write some sort of an executive order as it relates to mail-in balloting. Can you explain what would empower the president in the Constitution to take some sort of executive action as it relates to mail-in voting?
Again, I won't get ahead of the president on his actions and what those actions would be, and I'm not going to engage in a hypothetical as to what the actions would be and what authorities they would be based upon for yet to be announced actions. But just to once again underscore the president's concern when you look at the delays in voting in Pennsylvania, a very good report by CBS, Zach Hudak. He got a quote from Luzerne County Manager David Pedri, who oversaw or who identified some of these delays that they saw in Pennsylvania with mass mail-in voting. And he said this, quote, "I have this nightmare of CNN, Fox, CBS, and everyone else waiting for these things to come in on election night, and we don't have them. It is very hard to speed up this process." And Luzerne's experience was replicated across the state. So as we've seen in Pennsylvania, as we've seen in New York, as we see across the country, the president's very concerned about delays and outright fraud.
One final thing, Kaylee, on TikTok, if I may. The president said yesterday in the briefing that took place right here in the briefing room, the United States should get a very large percentage of that price because we're making it possible, and that was referring to Microsoft's proposed purchase of TikTok. I've never heard of that before, and maybe you could explain that to me, how the government could get a percentage of a price of a private transaction.
Again,
Can you explain
I'm not
how?
going to get ahead of the president
Yeah.
again on this action. Yes, Francesca.
Haley, I want to ask you something about the executive orders, but I do want to follow up on Kristen's question and just get a better understanding of what the president is doing personally to make sure that those extra unemployment benefits are reinstated. Is he calling senators on Capitol Hill? Does he have any plans to meet with Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer personally? And is the White House concerned that all parties will be blamed if there is no deal and voters will just stay home in November?
No one has worked harder to ensure that those payments get to Americans than this administration. Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin have been on the Hill many days now trying to get this deal worked out. But it is Democrats, it is Nancy Pelosi, it is Chuck Schumer that are making an absolute mockery of this process rather than coming towards us and do a clean extension of unemployment insurance. They are moving beyond what their initial request was of $3 trillion, and then they moved to $3.4 trillion. They wanted $100 billion for schools, and we offered $105 billion, to which they rejected. They are making a mockery of this process. We're still engaging with them, but this president has been clear. He's ready to act on this, and it is of paramount importance to him. And again, why would you reject Martha McSally's clean extension? Democrats are fundamentally unserious, and they're making a mockery of the process.
Calling them?
You mean
Okay, then if you don't want to move on that, with regards to the executive orders, the president has signed a flurry of those recently. He said yesterday that he expects to have a health care plan by the end of the month.